The night smelled of smoke and wet wool as the drums of celebration stuttered into a long, thin cry that was not celebration at all. Arya tasted ash at the back of her throat. She crouched in the shadow of an alder on the riverbank, breath tight and hot, and tried to see the shape of the twins through the gauze of mist rising off the green fork. Above, torches pricked at the dark like foxfire, winking, snuffed, winking again. The moon was a broken thing behind clouds. Somewhere a woman keened. Somewhere a wolf howled and was answered by men. "Keep low," the hound muttered, dragging her by the collar. His hands smelled of horse and iron. "The river's the only friend you have, girl. And even the river will drown you if you don't listen." The water lapped at her boots as he forced her down the slope. She tore free and slid on her backside, the muddy bank slick with trampled grass, until the green fork sucked at her ankles and numbed them. The chill climbed her shins like cold hands. The hound crouched beside her, his burned cheek a dark mass, his eyes small and bright. For a beat, he was the only thing in the world that was not moving. The night behind him seemed to breathe. "They're playing a song they never learned," he said. "Hear that? All the wrong notes." "It's wrong," she said, and didn't realize she'd spoken until the word drifted away like smoke. "Aye," he sniffed. "Something's gone to rot in there." A boy on the bridge called out drunkenly, then was cut off by a grunt that ended in water. The drums were thinner, the pipes harsh. The wind carried a new scent, coppery and flat. Fear sharpened everything in her. Every dimple in the mud, every ripple on the water, the paper-thin, papery hush when the reeds bowed their heads together. Her list rose in her mind unbidden. Joffrey, Cersei, Island Pain, the Tickler, the Mountain. It was a litany, a chain to pull her heart behind her ribs. She reached for it and it cut her palm. "Back," the hound said, but she was already moving. A dark knife blade of a girl skimming alongside the reeds, body low, breath slow, as her dancing master had taught her. Shadows moved on the bridge, men tugging, men pushing. Something heavy struck the river and sank without a splash. The cry that followed it was small and swallowed. Arya clenched her teeth until her jaw hurt. When the first body washed past her, face up, with a spring of red hair plastered to his brow, she flinched. The river turned him, turned the knife still in his belly, turned the thin torn cloth at his shoulder where a direwolf had been sewn. Robb, she thought, and then thought nothing at all for a while as the water went black and the world narrowed to the rushing in her ears. The second body had no head. The third had no hands. The river was carrying them all the same way. Away. The hound caught her by the scruff when she lunged and bore her to the earth. They scuffled in the mud, both panting, until he pinned her by the wrists. His breath smelled of sour ale and meat. "I can't fight an army," he said. "Neither can you." "I have to." "No. You have to keep your blood where it belongs." He let her up and spat. "We go now." In the dark, a horn sounded, 3 flat notes that made the reeds tremble. Hooves scudded on stone. The hound shoved her ahead of him, and they ran along the river with the water at their left. Mud sucking at her boots, the starved thorns grabbing her cloak. She couldn't hear her feet for the pounding of her heart. The drums behind them stuttered, then ceased. Someone shouted her brother's name. She bit her lip until the skin parted. They ran until the hound swore and slowed, and they crouched in the lee of a fallen willow with its limbs trailing like hair in the river. Arya hugged herself so hard her nails bit through the cloth of her sleeves. The hound watched the dark, head cocked. "You still have the coin?" he said suddenly. "The iron coin," she said, and her hand went to the small weight beneath her shirt as if it had always been there. She had half a mind to throw it into the river. It felt like a promise made to a person she no longer was. "If it comes to it, you use it," he said, eyes on the gloom. "Men kill for less than a coin. Men killed for songs tonight." "Aye." The hound's face creased. "Songs and wine and pride. That's all men are. Songs and pride and empty bellies." He rubbed his jaw with scarred knuckles. "Sleep if you can. We move at first light." Arya did not sleep. She crouched in her damp cloak, tasting iron when the wind turned, watching the river take the dead. The moon crawled across the clouds and the night shivered and settled. At some point, the howling of wolves rose again, near and numerous. The hair went up along her arms. She closed her eyes and for a moment, no longer than a gasp. She was not crouched by a riverbank but running on 4 feet through wet grass, mouth wet and sweet with blood, the world a wide black bowl. She caught the scent of men, the stink of fear, and her pack wheeled with her. Nymeria, she thought, and then the night was only night again. At dawn the mist lay low and thick as old soup. They stole along the bank and cut inland through the hedgerows, avoiding the road. Twice they lay flat while riders clattered past, fry men by the cut of their cloaks. Once the hound raised his sword, then lowered it. "Not today," he muttered. "Not 20 of them for one of me. Not 20 for 2 of us," Arya said, and he barked a laugh that had no humor in it. By midday they found a cart track that bent toward the east and a man asleep beneath it with his boots off. The hound woke him with a kick and took his boots and his cart, leaving him with a skin of wine and the promise not to come after them. The man went back to sleep. The hound put Arya in the cart among turnips and nettles and threw a tarp over her. She lay in the prickling dark listening to the wheel creak and the hound curse quietly at stones. When the tarp lifted, the sky had turned the color of old pewter and their road ran beside fields of barley already cut and bundled. "Salt pans," he said, chin jerking toward the east. "There's ships at salt pans. Ships for bravos," she said. "Ships for anywhere." He thinned his mouth. "You want the wall, I know, but if the riverlands go up like this, you won't get there by road or river." He studied her. "You know what bravos is?" "Another city," she said. "Another wolf den." He glanced at the horizon. "You could be safe there." Safe was a word that made her teeth itch. "I have to go north." "To the wall? Why?" He snorted. "Your black crow of a brother can't keep a fire lit without swearing on a book about it." She thought of Winterfell. Not the ashes Theon left, but the taste of apple cake still hot. The way the stones held warmth where the sun touched them. The way snowflakes melted in the weirwood's hair. The memory hurt like a bruise. "Not the wall," she said. "Home. Home's ashes. Not forever." She looked at her hands, small and raw-boned. There was mud beneath the nails. "They killed Robb." She made herself say his name. "They killed my mother. They feed their bellies and call it duty." She lifted her head. Her voice steadied. "The North needs a Stark they can see." The hound stared at her as if she were a puzzle with a piece missing. "And you think that's you?" "I am a Stark." Her voice was very small in the cart, but it did not shake now. "I have to be." He scrubbed at his mouth. "Salt pans," he said again, but softer. "There's a Bravosi captain there who once owed me a favor. He can be persuaded to owe me again." He searched her face, the hard line of her jaw, the slight set of her shoulders. "North, then. Took 3 days, and in that time the world learned a new name for shame."
Village smoldered.
Chickens ran half wild among weeds in trampled yards. Men with thin faces watched from hedges and clutched sticks as if they were swords. Once they found a dead woman tied to a tree by her hair and Arya had to look away. Once they met riders with no badge but the hunger in their eyes, who circled the cart like flies. The hound showed teeth and steel and they drifted off sullenly, the way smoke drifts when there's no wind. Salt pans stank of rotting fish and smoke. Half the town had burned, and the rest peered at the world through shutters. The docks were a toothless smile missing planks. Still, there were ships, lean shadow boats from Bravos and fat-bellied cogs from Sunderland, and men who spoke in the slithering, sing-song tongues of places where the sea was blue and closed over a man's head smooth as silk. The hound found his captain in a wine shop whose windows had been ripped out for firewood, a man with short gray curls and a scar like a second mouth along his cheek. "Raffo," the hound said. "Sander," the captain said, tasting all the consonants like hard apricots. He took in Arya with a single, unblinking flicker. "And the little fish?" "A fare," the hound said. "Paid in silver. I take gold." The captain's second mouth smiled. "Or I take songs. I take a ship's deckhand overboard," the hound said blandly, "and see if the sharks prefer old meat." They haggled, as men must, because haggling is the only way many men can feel alive. In the end, the hound paid with a knife of good steel and the promise of something left unnameable. And Arya stood on a deck that smelled of tar and salt and watched salt pans dwindle until it was no more than a sooty thumbprint on a gray line. The captain set a course north along the fingers, then cut across the bight toward the mouth of the white knife, and the sea became a sleeping animal beneath her, sometimes twitching, sometimes rolling on its other side. At night, she dreamed of wolves almost every time. In her dreams, the pack's breaths were her breath. The river tasted of pennies and weeds. She ran with them beneath a sky full of torn rag clouds, and the first flakes of the true winter the old men had muttered about tickled her whiskers. Once, in a dream, a man stood among the trunks of black pines and watched her with a face she could not see. When he raised his hand, the pack lowered their heads. The weirwood stood beyond him, its leaves whispering like 1,000 small mouths, and the blood on its face was not blood at all but sap that looked like blood. She woke with her heart beating too hard, the captain's boots thudding a steady rhythm on the planks above. White Harbor rose from the fog like a promise someone had kept. Its towers were like the fingers of a hand reaching for a thing just out of reach. The merman's court loomed over the river like a lord who had eaten 3 lesser lords for breakfast. The wolf's den crouched between river and sea, ancient and stubborn, its stones older than stories. Even so far south of the deep snows, winter had gathered itself about the city. Fishermen with salt-stiff beards standing closer than they needed to, knobs of frost on the ropes, children in 3 layers of wool looking out from between scarves. The river had a skin like cloudy glass along its edges. Men chopped at it with axes to free their boats. The hound put a hand on her shoulder before they parted on the quay. He had no words for it, and neither did she. He only nodded once, the gesture abrupt and almost shy, and turned away. She watched him go and wanted, all at once, to call him back, and did not. There were things you could only walk into alone. The merman's court was not open to stray girls, but the kitchens took on anyone who could carry and hold her tongue. Arya held both. She peeled turnips until her fingers ached and learned the names of the men who came with news. Sailors who talked for coin and men-at-arms who talked for ale, and thin women with the river in their hair who talked for nothing because words were lighter than hunger. She listened and learned that Lord Wyman Manderley, massive, swaddled in velvet, with little eyes that missed nothing, bowed to Roose Bolton in public and sharpened his knives in private. She learned that men whispered of wolf packs that brought down Fry outriders in the night and left only boots. She learned that there were more Starks in the world than Crows days ago had said. Whispers of a boy on a savage island of unicorns and granite. Whispers of a girl in the Vale with copper hair who liked to look at the sky and pretend she remembered faces. Arya scrubbed pans until she could see her own reflection in a sheet of pewter, and then one morning the reflection had a crown of steam instead of hair. She blinked and the crown dissolved, but the skin between her shoulders prickled all the same. That afternoon, when the kitchen was at its loudest and dullest, carrots thumping, knives chopping, a boy crying because he had cut himself, an old man with a bend like a hook to his nose came to stand at the doorway and simply looked at her. He did not look at the others. He looked at Arya so long that the flower boy stopped crying out of sheer curiosity. The old man flicked 2 fingers. She wiped her hands and followed. They passed through corridors that smelled of wax and old wool. The walls were hung with tapestries of ships, of mermaids with hair like nets. In a small, warm room, Lord Wyman Manderley sat like a mountain that had thought better of being a mountain and settled for a chair. 2 men stood at either side of him. One thin and hawk-nosed in gray, one with a jaw like an anvil. The door shut behind Arya softly. "So," Lord Wyman said, and his voice was soft too, and old and dangerous. "You are a girl of the kitchens with eyes like ice water and a way of walking that does not belong to anyone who has never held steel. Tell me which." Arya swallowed. The old man who had fetched her kept his eyes on the floor. The 2 guards watched her as if she were a bird they had never seen. "My name is Arya," she said, and then the name gathered weight. "Arya Stark of Winterfell." Lord Wyman's little eyes did not blink once. "Prove it," he said almost kindly. Her heart slammed twice against her ribs. All at once she thought of the coin, of throwing it down like a gauntlet would be thrown, of words that opened doors in far-off cities. But this was not a far-off city. This was the North, and it had a flavor in the mouth like old iron. She tried to think of a thing only a Stark would know. "In the crypts," she said slowly, "there are stone wolves at my father's feet and my grandfather's, and the swords across their laps are iron. Bran once touched one, and Mother slapped his hand and made him name the lords in order. He forgot Brandon the Burnt and cried." An odd sound escaped Lord Wyman, half laugh and half something else, as if a man had barked and coughed at once. "Serve the hall for a week," he said. "Hold your tongue. Keep your eyes." He raised a hand when she started to protest. "A week? I cannot afford to be wrong." He tilted his head. "Do you know why?" Arya thought of the bodies in the river, of the way the wolves howled as if they were singing the names of their dead. "Because the wrong would cost more than your life," she said. "Good." Lord Wyman lifted a handkerchief and dabbed at his mouth with great delicacy. "Go and serve." She served, and she watched. And at the end of 7 days Lord Wyman had her brought again to the small warm room and closed the door himself behind her. The old man with the hooked nose stood at his shoulder, and a woman now, tall, with hair braided back so tightly that it sharpened her cheekbones and made her mouth seem thin and merciless. "You know me," the woman said. "Say it." "You're Willa Manderly," Arya said, surprised at the steadiness of her voice. "Your sister was married to a fry." She did not say, "Your lady mother sends men out in secret boats and serves pies with too much meat." Willa's mouth did not change, but something in her eyes did. "And you are Arya Stark if you are anyone. The question is who knows and who must not." Lord Wyman blew out a breath that, for a big man, was more like the sigh of a bellows. "In White Harbor," he said, "we have manners. We bow to those we hate, we kiss those we plan to kill, and we serve our enemies pies. I require you to have the patience for manners." He leaned forward and the chair creaked. "Do you have it?" "I have a list," Arya said. "Good." Lord Wyman's eyes gleamed. "Lists make patience bearable. The North remembers, child. We remember debts, and the names of butchers, and the taste of snow when it first falls on your tongue. And we remember our kings." "I am not a king," Arya said. "I am a girl." "You will forgive the North," Lord Wyman murmured, "if it has no taste for the difference." They did not announce her. They hid her in plain sight. Willa had her hair cut blunt and short, and she put her in the gray of a serving girl to carry the trencher into the great hall when fry men came through, soaking fat into bread with their greasy fingers and laughing too loud at their own jokes. Once, when a man with a face like a pig's hem slapped Arya's backside as she passed, Willa's eyes moved, and a day later, he was gone from White Harbor, and rumor had him choking on fish bones on the road to the Twins. Arya learned the hall the way she learned a blade, where the shadows pooled, where the draft made candles gutter, who spoke too much when they were drunk, who never drank at all. On the 7th night of her 2nd week, Lord Wyman had her brought to the Godswood. White Harbor's Godswood was a long, narrow garden of salt-stung elms and birch, but in its heart the weirwood lifted its white limbs like a man in supplication, and the face carved in it looked older than the sea. A handful of men and women stood there. Willa, the old man with the hooked nose, the thin hawk-faced one in gray, a shorter man with a scar across his scalp that made his hair grow in 2 directions, a girl with a jaw like oak root, Lyanna Mormont. When Arya saw her, she had to press her teeth together against the sudden, ridiculous urge to laugh. Lyanna looked her up and down as if measuring a calf for slaughter. "Bear Island knows no king but the king in the North whose name is Stark," she said without preamble, in a voice like a thrown rock. "Or queen." She glanced at Lord Wyman. "If she is, she is," the old man with the hooked nose said. "I would swear it on a groat's worth of salt if I had it to spare." A man stepped from the shadows at the far side of the Godswood, and Arya's breath stopped. He was lean, his hair gone salt, his face a map of hard places and men he had outlived. His cloak was singed at the edges. He moved without wasting anything. She had never seen him, yet she knew him. There was something in the way his hand hovered near the hilt of his knife, the way his eyes flicked and found and judged. "You're Davos," she said before she knew she would. He blinked, then smiled the smallest smile. "Your brother had a way of picking true men out of a crowd. It seems to run in the family, milady." "Ser Davos," Lord Wyman said, "is a smuggler who became a knight who became a hand. He works for a king who insists on laws the way some men insist on breakfast." "Stannis," Arya said carefully. "King Stannis." "Aye," Davos said. The wind lifted his hair and laid it down again. "He means to come north." Lord Wyman folded his hands over his belly. "The north is a stubborn stone. It does not move easily. We will not trade the knife in our back for a noose at our throat, even if the noose is tight in a different style." Davos looked at Arya and did not look away. "I came once before to White Harbor. Lord Wyman had my head off and back on again more times than I care to count before he decided I wasn't lying to him." He studied her. "Yo, you are brother named another to succeed him." "Jon," Arya said. The word was a warm thing. "He wouldn't take it." "He may not be given a choice," Davos said. "Kings make hard uses of kin." "Not mine," Arya said fiercely, and then made herself breathe. "Jon is my brother as much as any of them. He has vows. I have legs." She looked up at the weirwood's face and spoke to it without meaning to. "If the North needs a Stark it can see, I will be that." Willa's mouth almost softened. "Stannis would accept you as Lady of Winterfell," she said. "He would have your oath and you would have his sword against the Boltons. He will not call you queen." Lyanna Mormont's chin lifted. "You will wear the bronze and iron of the first men and the snow will melt on it and hiss when the fire takes it," she said flatly. "You will be what you say you are." "We are not children playing at war," Lord Wyman said heavily, but he looked at Arya as if she were a coal with a heart of blue. "I know we are not," Arya said to all of them and none of them. "If the name Queen makes men fight for me who would not fight for a lady, then I will take the name. If it makes the wolves answer when I call, I will howl it from the roof of the world." Davos's smile went away. "Names are sharp," he said. "Be sure the cut you mean to take." "I am," she said. She was surprised to find that she was. Her knees felt hollow and her hands ached, and all she wanted in that moment was to be 10 years old again and hide in the kitchens with a stolen heel of bread. But her face was calm. "I am Arya of House Stark, blood of the first men, daughter of Eddard and Catelyn. Robb is dead. Bran is lost to me and Rickon is a wolf in a story. Sansa." She bit the name and swallowed it because saying it hurt. "Jon is my brother and snow is snow." She put her palm on the weirwood's bark, surprised by how warm it felt. "If I do not stand up, no one will." "I," Lyanna Mormont said, and there was a fierce, small light in her eyes. "Then stand up." They crowned her in the God's Wood of White Harbor on a morning when ice rimed the edge of the white knife and the gulls cried like iron. It was no grand thing, not like songs would make it later. Willa brought a circlet hammered hastily from bronze and studded with the black heads of old iron nails pried from a broken gate of the wolf's den. And Lord Wyman settled it on Arya's hair with hands so careful they shook. He kissed her brow, and his lips were salty. Lyanna Mormont went to one knee and then to both as if she could not get low enough. Men who had seen 3 winters more than any man should wept openly. Davos watched with his jaw set, and when she turned to him he bowed with the stiff exactness of a man who had measured his oath and found it fit. "My queen," he said, tasting the word. "The North is a hard land. I will tell my king you are harder." "Tell him I am not his," Arya said quietly. Then, because there was no room for any breath in her chest, she bent and put her forehead to the heart tree and let herself be a girl for the space of 3 heartbeats. When she straightened, the world had a new thread woven through it. They called banners without calling banners. Men came alone at first, on foot, with axes over their shoulders and knives at their belts, their cloaks mended by wives and sisters who told them not to die in the snow. Then came lords with 6 men, with 10, their horses thin and their eyes bright with something like shame and something like relief. Tall hearts with scars and no lord to follow. Cerwyn men who had not forgiven. Little clans from the hills with names like Norey and Wool, who had worn the Boltons like ill-fitting coats and were glad of an excuse to throw them off. Umber men from Last Hearth who were split in two, as if the phrase had cleaved their hearts down the center. Some came in the open and some came by night and did not tell even their cousins. Manderly men turned out like the sea itself, steady, tidal, endless. They ate porridge and salt cod and the tough meat of old sheep and clapped one another on the shoulders. They called her little and called her fierce and called her by the name Queen they had not spoken since Torrin knelt. Before they marched, Arya rode upriver to a village of squat stone houses where the gods would had a willow instead of a weirwood, and she dispensed judgment because men asked her to. Two brothers had come to blows over a ewe so scrawny Arya could see the joints through its fleece. The wife of one had been struck and would not say by whom. Arya listened with needle in her lap and her crown under her cloak, and she said, "You will share the ewe and the lamb that comes of her, and the firstborn of that lamb, and so for 3 turnings. If one of you raises a hand to a woman, I will cut that hand off myself." The men bowed their heads and did not look at their wives. That night in her tent she washed blood that wasn't there from her hands, and dreamed again of wolves running. Ravens flew. Roose Bolton received them in Barrowton with his pale fingers still, his mouth a smear. Lord Walder Frey spat grey spittle at his hearth and sent boys with more mouths than sense to ride and be killed. Winter's first true storm rode in from the sea with a voice like a drum, and a dust of snow turned to a fall, turned to a world of white. In the snow, Stannis Baratheon made his war like a man who meant to hammer winter into a coin and spend it. He took Deepwood Mott and gave it back to the Glovers with a nod as scant as if he had returned a knife he'd borrowed. He sent Davos eastward with a message and a hope that smelled like old fish. "Find me the boy Rickon on Skagos, wild and sharp and dangerous as a reef, and I will give the North something it cannot refuse." Davos went with a look on his face like a man walking into a storm he has already measured and found too tall. Arya thought of Rickon so hard it made her temples ache. She remembered his white teeth and his furious little fists and how he loved to hide in the crypts where the old stone kings watched with eyes that were only shadows. She did not tell Davos to bring him back to make her less alone. She said only, "Bring him home." And Davos nodded as if she had given him a weight that fit his hands. They marched at last. White Harbor spilled men like a horn spills wine. The White Knife carried their boats up as far as boats would go, their oars biting ice. Beyond that it was boots. The road was a line of black in a world of white. The wind made mouths of them all. It stole words, flattened banners, flung snow in faces so hard it stung like gravel. Arya rode at the fore on a shaggy gray mare that blew steam like a smithy and had a temper that matched her own. Lord Wyman came behind in a sled with runners greased with tallow, drawn by oxen like brown boulders. Willa rode like a nail. Lyanna Mormont rode a bear of a pony that bit anyone who came too close. When Arya laughed at that, the stone that had been in her chest since the river loosened a little. They made no banners of bright silk. They carried rough cloth with gray dye, and some went bare of any sigil at all, because the snow would have hidden it anyway. They had fewer horns than they wanted and more hunger than they needed. Still they came. In a steading on the road to Winterfell, a knot of houses and a barn with a sagging roof, they found a handful of Cerwyn boys with frost in their brows and 2 old men who had survived Ramsay's kindness by pretending to be stupider than they were. The boys went to their knees in the snow when they saw Arya, then leaped up again because the snow burned their skin. Somehow, in the way hearts talk to one another when mouths are too slow, the word ran. The Wolf Queen is come. Roose Bolton moved like a shadow on a hill. He drew men up into Winterfell like a man draws a blanket to his chin. Ryswells with their sly eyes, Dustins with their pride, Freys with their appetite, a handful of Umbers with faces like chopped wood. He made gifts, bread and salt and smiles that did not reach his eyes. He made marriage, too. The girl they called Arya in his hall trembled with every step, and those who had known the real child of Eddard and Catelyn looked once and looked away, because looking twice would have been treason to truth. Ramsay laughed too loudly and cut meat too red. The snow fell and fell. Men in that hall were colder than the dogs in their kennels. Between the falling of one snow and the next, a rumor slipped into Winterfell like a weasel. The true wolf wears a crown of nails. A fry laughed until Ramsay had him flayed for saying it once too often. The rumor took no heed. It grew teeth. Men sharpened their knives and did not know whether it was to keep or to give away. At the edge of the wolfswood, in snow up to the belly of the men and the chest of the dogs, Arya sent hunters out to bring in meat and brought them back alive by the simple trick of knowing how to tie a rope around a man's waist and not letting go. She learned the names of every fire in her camp, who warmed their hands at which. She kept a list of who would die first if she made a mistake. Willa and Lyanna and that boy from Cerwyn who had only one glove and pushed the other flaming hand into his cloak to warm the stump of his sleeve. She slept little. When she did sleep, she dreamed of a red mouth in a white face whispering in a voice she almost knew. The scouts brought back something stranger than meat. A gray man with a face like winterthorn and a name that tasted of old snow. Moor's Umber, he said. Crow food. He grinned at her with yellow teeth and said, "My queen, we are two tribes with one story. I have men within and men without. Do not be angry with me for that. It is how I keep us alive." He laughed until the laugh turned into a cough. "My nephew's banner flies where it must. My heart flies where it should." "A heart is not a bird," Lyanna Mormont snapped, and Moors grinned wider. "Aye, it sits stubborn in the chest and tells you stories until you believe them." "You will open the gates," Arya said, and the wind took the steam of her breath as if it were a promise written in fog. "When I say your name, you will open them." "Bold," Moors said cheerfully. "I like bold. Bold gets men killed," Davos said, stepping from the lee of a pine with snow in his beard, a raven perched like a judgment on his shoulder. He had returned with the storm, and he carried in his eyes a news that he had not spoken to anyone yet. He looked at Arya as if she were a daughter who had chosen a road he had not chosen for her and gone too far to call back. "Bold and Winter are poor bedfellows. Bold and Winter brought the kings of Winter their crowns," Willa said dryly, "and lost them too. The plan was a blanket too short to cover everyone's feet. That was how plans were in the north in winter. Davos wanted to wait on Stannis and make the Bolton Fry host split its belly feeding itself. Lord Wyman wanted to draw them out across the plain. Lyanna wanted to walk into Winterfell and drag Ramsay out by the hair and put him in a cage and feed him only snow. Moors Umber wanted to betray his betrayal only at the last. Arya wanted all of it. She wanted to be 10 again, and she wanted to be a woman of 30, and she wanted her father's voice and mother's hand, and she wanted the north to be clean again. She chose the weirwood. On the night the storm tired itself out and lay panting, leave to the wolves to finish its work, Arya took 10 men she trusted and a torch that sputtered and would not stay lit and went with Moors Umber to the old postern gate at Winterfell, the Hunter's Gate, where the blood of 100 winters had frozen and been forgotten in the cracks of the stone. The snow there lay in a long drift, thin as rice paper, and the stones sweated blackly. The gate was barred, and beyond it she could hear the deep, sleep-laden breath of the castle, the cough of a guard, the tick of cooling iron. Moors muttered to himself and knocked 3 times in a rhythm that meant one thing to one man and another to another. Nothing. He made as if to knock again, and then a hand reached through the murder hole, slender and bloodless, and took hold of the bar. It lifted with a groan like an old man rising. The gate opened a finger, 2 fingers, a hand. The man who stood beyond had eyes like pits with snow fallen in. He had no fingers on his left hand at all, only stumps, and no pride left anywhere that Arya could see. His face was a map of pain. He flinched when she moved. "Theon," she said, before the others could, came out like a breath. "Reek no more." He flinched again, and something moved behind his eyes, something like a drowned thing that had remembered swimming. "Arya," he whispered. The name was a cut through frost. "He made a wife of a girl with your name." "I could not," he swallowed. It looked like it hurt. "Are you a ghost?" No. Arya stepped closer. Her torch guttered and went out. "I am a wolf." She leaned in, voice low, quick as a knife. "Will you be forgiven?" No, Theon said, and his mouth twitched, toward laughter or tears or both. Not by any gods I would trust, but I can try. He led them through passages that still held the breath of her childhood, though it had changed its smell, old stone and cold iron and the faintest powder of ash. Once, in a low place between walls, Arya touched the stone with her palm and felt the memory in it, of feet, of voices, of the way sunlight had used to fall in long bars across the yard. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from making a sound. Theon knew the dark the way a man knows his own shame. He took them up a stair that was not there unless you already knew it, and down another that stooped under its own lintels. In a narrow throat of a corridor, he stopped and held up his single hand for silence. Above, he breathed. Dogs. Arya put her ear to the stone and listened. The dogs made that low song of theirs, half growl and half purr. She felt them in her bones, and something more. A sense of a map drawn in smell and warmth, a pulse where the heart should be in the air. She closed her eyes, and for one heartbeat was not herself but something that would have tasted blood from a man's pulse gladly. She opened her eyes, and the stone was only stone again. They'll know us, she said. They'll know me, Theon said bleakly. Mor's Umber grinned his grin. Then it is good we brought meat the dogs like better. He nodded to a sack two of his men carried. Inside it was the ham of a thing Arya told herself had been a pig. The dogs came, and for a terrible breath they did not eat as men understand eating but raked the meat with their teeth and took pieces from flesh like thieves. Then they were too busy to bark. They came up into the inner yard and the stars were hard and small above them. Winterfell rose around them, black against black. Arya had a moment like falling. Here was where she had learned to shoot a bow. There where Bran had climbed. There where Sansa had laughed with Jane about a thing that seemed so huge it had squeezed all the air from their lungs. A ghost of a snowball fight lifted one crust of snow and let it fall. She had to swallow 3 times before her voice worked. Moors, she said. Now. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled like a hawk. Somewhere inside the castle, a man who had been told to sleep light woke and remembered the story his heart had told him. The gate toward the east opened a palm's width, then 6 palms. Men who had waited 3 winters for this moment moved like breath. They were not many. They were enough to open the rest of the gates. Ramsay came into the yard with bare forearms and a smile like a wound. The snow made a scurf on his hair. He had a knife in each hand and a shirt that had never learned to be laced. He looked like a boy who had found something he meant to break slowly. Look, he said and laughed. Wolves. Dog, Theon said. His voice did not tremble. Arya would have known whether it did. It did not. Heel. Ramsay flicked his eyes to Theon and then to Arya and back again, and for a breath he was not sure which thing in front of him would be the better sport. In that breath Willa Manderly put an arrow in his shoulder from shadow, and under the breath Lyanna Mormont sprang forward like a thrown axe and slashed at his thigh, and the breath after that was all knives and the smells of men. Ramsay screamed. It sounded like a pig's scream. Theon moved like smoke, and his blade went in under ribs with the accuracy of a man who had seen the map too often not to know it by heart. Ramsay made a choking sound and tried to laugh again, and then he made no sound at all. After, there was only snow. Men panted. Someone sobbed. Somewhere a dog howled. The snow fell straight down as if the sky had decided to stop playing at wind. Arya wiped her blade on the hem of her cloak and looked for Roose. Roose was not a man who let himself be found. He slipped from Winterfell at first stink of dawn with 2 men and no pride, and made for the road south where the snow lay less deep. He did not reckon on wolves because Roose Bolton was a man who counted edges and numbers and never counted teeth he could not see. The pack ran him down between 2 birches whose bark shone in the sick, weak daylight like old bone. They took his horse first. Roose stood with his sword making lines in the air as if he were cutting the world into manageable pieces, and the wolves sat down just beyond the reach of the blade and watched him. One turned her head and looked at Arya with eyes yellow as old coins. Her tongue lolled. Arya did not speak aloud. She did not have to. The pack flowed forward like a thought, and when they were done the snow did not look white there anymore. The crows came later and told the story to themselves. It was not the end. It never is. The phrase had to be broken, and the Riswells had to be made to remember they were Northmen and not the sort of men who counted knives the way a butcher counts chops. The Dustons had to be held near or far. The nearer with bread and salt, the farther with watchful eyes. Men who had done cruel things had to be given work they could not ruin. Men who had survived Ramsay had to be given meat and words they would believe. The women who had been made to sing had to be told no one would make them sing again. Winterfell stones had to be warmed again with fires that had no ghosts in them. Stannis came on a day that was so cold the air cracked. His banner was a stag on a field that had once been bright and now was the color of old blood. He rode like a man who had never learned how to do anything else. His face was a map of lines. He dismounted with a stiffness that told Arya where it hurt him to move and handed his reins to a squire without looking at him. He looked at the banners arrayed on Winterfell's walls. The Merman, the Bear, the Serwyn axes, the Umber Giant, the Tall Heart's antlers that someone had mended with needle and thread, and at the rough gray cloth with the direwolf stitched by hands that had not had enough light to work by. He looked at Arya last. "My lord," she said, because she would not give him the name he wanted. "My lady," he said, because he would not give her the name she had taken. They stood in the snow with all the stories between them. Davos watched, a cautious shadow. Lord Wyman's eyes were little lights. Lyanna Mormont was a small stone that would not move for gold or iron or prayer. "I have come to take your oath," Stannis said. "You have come to feed your men," Arya said. "We will share our bread. We have enough. Not much, but enough." Stannis's mouth twitched as if at a joke that had wandered into the wrong room. "You have set a crown upon your head that belongs to a dead line." "I belong to that line," Arya said. "I am not dead." He looked past her to the heart tree and drew in a breath that made no steam. "Your brother left a will." "I know," Arya said. "I love him still." "He meant your bastard brother to sit where you stand." "Jon will not come," she said. The words were hard to say and easy. "He has work that is winter's work, and all our lives sit on it." She held Stannis's gaze like a blade. "He would leave it only if I failed." Stannis studied her face as if it were a ledger. He studied her camp. The way the men sat at their fires, how they shared their bread, how the officers stood so the wind would hit them first. "Winter will take half of you," he said, "and the other half will have to fight what comes after that." He lifted his chin a fraction. "I will not bend the knee to your crown. Take my aid as Lord of Dragonstone and rightful king, and give me your sword when I call, and I will name you Lady of Winterfell and Warden of the North." "That is a fair bargain when the world is only swords and names," Arya said. "The North is more than that. We will give you our swords if you fight the dead when they come. We will not kneel to a king who came with a Southron winter and thinks it the worst of it." She paused. Her breath plumed and thinned. "Come to our God's wood. Take the Weirwood's word, not mine." He did not flinch at that, which pleased her more than it should have. He went with her under the white branches, and he put his hand on the face in the bark without reverence and without disdain. Davos watched with his mouth a thin line, and later he told Arya, in a voice low and even, that he had never seen his king look more like a man and less like a banner than he had under that tree. In the nights that followed, letters flew like owls. Arya wrote to Jon with a hand that only trembled a little when no one watched. She told him that she had put iron and bronze on her head because someone had to. She told him that she had thought of a time when they had raced across the yard and she had beaten him only because he had looked back to grin at Bran on the wall. She told him that he must not come. She told him she needed him to stay where he was and be who he was. She sealed the letter with wax and a rough impression of a direwolf's head and prayed, awkwardly, fiercely, to old gods and new alike that it would not be the last thing she sent him in this life. Days unspooled. Winterfell's stones warmed. They warmed slowly. The kitchens began to smell of bread again. The words the women sang while they kneaded were not the words men had made them sing. The crypts filled with a quiet that was not fear. Once, Arya went down alone with a lamp and stood before her father's stone. She put her hand on the iron sword and it was cold and rough. She told him, without moving her mouth, what she had done, and he did not answer because stones do not. But the quiet around her changed shape, as if it had taken a breath it had not known it was holding. The word came on a raven's wing while she stood in the early morning light watching men mend a harness with rawhide. Davos brought it. He read everything like a man who expects words to betray him, and his face as he handed her the parchment was careful. Arya broke the seal with her thumbnail. The words inside were square and spare. Jon's hand. He wrote of cold so deep it burned, of enemies that did not feel cold, of choices that had not felt like choices when he made them. He wrote, "I am proud of you." He wrote, "Do not send me anyone you cannot bear losing." He wrote, "If you must be a queen who remembers that winter is not a tale told to frighten children into eating their broth." She went to the Godswood and read the letter again and again until she knew it like the list in her head, and then she burned it and watched the flame take it wholly, because there were eyes in Winterfell and some of them were kindly and some of them were holes in a face. Ash fell on her boots like black snow. The next letter came with a seal that smelled faintly of the sea. Davos had neat script, more careful than Jon's, each word set down as if he had asked it whether it wished to live on paper. He wrote, "Skagos is a place of knives." He wrote, "The boy lives." He wrote, "He is wild and I am not the man to tame him." He wrote, "I will bring him if I must carry him slung over my back like a sack of turnips, but I would rather bring him walking." Arya sat down very slowly in the snow with the letter in her lap. The weight of the crown on her head had been a thing she had thought of as heat. For the first time she understood it as weight. Rickon. She could see his grubby hands. She could hear him yelling after Shaggy Dog. She could not make her mind fit the boy into the words Davos had sent her. Knives, wild. She put the letter away next to her skin. She did not tell anyone until night, and then she told Lyanna because Lyanna would not use the news like a knife. Lyanna only nodded once, as if Arya had said a thing Lyanna already knew and had been waiting to see if Arya would say too. "What will you do?" Lyanna asked, and it was not the question of a child. "Be queen until my brother stands where I stand and the North looks at him and sees home," Arya said. "And if the North looks and sees a boy who bites?" Lyanna asked. "Then I will stand beside him and let him bite," Arya said, and her mouth did something that was almost a smile. "We are wolves. We do not chew with our molars." The world did not grow kinder. Food was scarce even with Manderly's granaries opened and men sent downriver with sleds and poles. Some nights, men quarreled over bread and had to be separated with flat of blade. Some days, women came from the villages with cheeks so chapped they bled and eyes that had learned to be flat when men looked at them. Arya took their hands in hers until the stiffness in their fingers loosened. She more often said, "I don't know," than she had imagined a queen could. She learned that there were men who would fight hard for a leader who said, "I don't know but we'll find out," and fewer who would fight for a leader who said, "I know," when she did not. She went once with Willa Manderly to the wolf's den, because Willa asked her to see a thing. They walked through corridors where the sea had chewed at the mortar, and Willa showed her a room where there were hooks in the ceiling and told her what those hooks had once been used for. Arya stood there with her hands clenched until her nails cut her palms and thought of a list that had grown long and then shortened and then gathered itself into something less like a chain and more like a net she would cast only when it would bring her food and not drown her. When spring came, it would not be a southern spring. It would be a loosening of a knot that had been tied too tight for too long. Arya did not think of spring. She thought of the way frost sounded when you broke it under your heel. She thought of letters and of wolves. She thought of her crown and of how it was made from nails taken from a gate that had held in the dark. She slept with Needle near and her door unbarred. The last days of that first winter as queen in the north were measured in howls. At night, the pack sang. It was not only Nymeria's pack. Other wolves had come down from the high woods with hunger on their ribs and the smell of the old white wind in their fur, and they sang with eyes like moonstones. When she dreamed now, Arya did not lose herself in them as she had once done. She stood a little apart and watched them run. It made her lonelier than she had believed she could bear some nights, and other nights it made her feel as if the world were larger than her skin. On a morning like frozen linen, stiff, brittle, unforgiving, the horns on Winterfell's wall sounded twice, then 3 times. The men moved toward the parapets with a steadiness that made Arya's chest ease. She went to the gatehouse with Lyanna at her side and Willa a step behind and looked down on a column of men coming up the road through the snow. Their banners were ragged. The first of them bore no banner at all. He walked with a stride like anger. His hair hung uncombed. At his side, tethered to a length of rope, a man had nodded and unknotted 100 times. A shaggy black-furred beast paced with teeth bared, shaking its head as if listening to a thing no one else could hear. Rickon stopped in the yard and looked up at the walls the way a boy sizes up a tree before he climbs it. The men around him shifted. The shaggy dog looked at Arya and lifted his lip as if to show her his name had not been given in jest. Rickon reached up and put his hand on the dog's head. The dog settled a fraction. Davos stepped out from behind them both. His face cracked with cold and with the unpracticed shape of a smile. Arya went down the steps of the gate and crossed the yard because if she did not she would break in two like ice that had tried to bear too much weight. She stopped 3 paces from her brother because there were eyes on her and because she wanted to run the last 3 and throw her arms around his neck and because she knew if she did he might bite her out of habit. And the fact that she knew that and loved him anyway was the whole of the winter inside her. "Rickon," she said. He stared at her as if at a thing he had known in a dream. Then he grinned, sudden and feral, and she saw something of Bran there, something of Robb, something of a boy who had run with wolves so long he had forgotten how to walk. "Arya," he said, and the sound of her name in his mouth was a breaking and a mending all at once. Behind them, the men who had marched with him looked up at the walls of Winterfell and saw a girl with a crown of nails and a boy with a hand on a wolf's head. And for a heartbeat, they did not know which story they were in. Then their shoulders eased. Some of them laughed, low and rumbling. One of them began to cry and could not stop, and the man beside him put an arm around his shoulders and let him cry because there was no shame in it now. That night, they built the largest fire the yard had seen since Theon's. It did not taste of fear. The circle of men and women around it was wide, and there were spaces in it where those who had died might have stood, and those spaces made the circle no weaker. Arya sat with Rickon, and Shaggy Dog lay with his muzzle on Rickon's knee, and the wolf's yellow eyes watched the fire as if it were an enemy he had decided, just for tonight, not to eat. Stannis came to the fire like a man who disliked it on principle and sat on a bench as if the bench had offended him. Davos drank something hot and made a face as if it were a sin to like it. Lord Wyman fell asleep and snored like a saw. Lyanna Mormont stared into the flames and spoke to no one for a long time, then said to Rickon, "If you bite me, I will bite you back." And Rickon laughed and did not. Later, much later, when the fire was no more than a ring of embers and the night had come back into its own, Arya stood alone in the Godswood. The crown was heavy in her hands. She bowed her head, and for the first time since she had put it on, she slipped it off and held it against her breast. Not as a thing to wear, but as a thing to guard. She looked at the face in the bark, at the bleeding eyes, at the mouth that had never moved and had said so much to so many. She thought of the girl who had stood at a river while the Green Fork took her family away piece by piece, and of the girl who had walked into a room and told a fat lord her name, and of the woman who had led men through snow and blood and taken back a house that had always been more than a house. "I will give it to him when he is ready," she said aloud, "because there are some vows that need air to make them strong. And I will stand next to him until then. And if winter takes me first, I will stand in the crypt and keep watch." The wind moved in the branches. Snow hissed faintly where it brushed the bark. The world was old and large and very much itself. Somewhere beyond the walls of Winterfell, wolves began to sing again, their voices braided and unbraided in the night like rope. On the wall, a man with a black cloak and a face like a story lifted his head and listened and smiled a little without meaning to. In the Vale, a girl with copper hair stood at a window and looked out at the sky and felt something unnameable ease in her chest. On a ship cut with ice, a man with too few fingers set his course by stars and secrets. Arya slid the crown back onto her head. It was cold and right. She turned and walked back toward the light. Winter would not forget her name. She would not let it.